welcome once again to Let's Talk Marriage. This is Pastor Larry coming to you this Wednesday afternoon with Let's Talk Marriage. All right. We're going to get right on into our program on today. Our program today, first of all, I hope everyone is doing well. If you woke up this morning, guess what? You are doing well. All right. We're going to get right on into our program today. We're going to be talking about having a conversation with your spouse, which is very important to have a conversation with your spouse. The reason why we're covering this is a lot of times, a lot of couples don't have a conversation unless they're arguing or in the middle of a dispute or disagreement. That's the only time they seem to talk. They don't talk on a normal basis. And a lot of times, especially our women, they think, or they always want the guy to share his deepest soul. And a lot of times guys are not like that. They don't, talk about their deepest things. But if you start having regular conversations, then sometimes things like that come out because they get more comfortable with it, especially you newlyweds. You get more comfortable with talking on just regular conversation. And there's nothing wrong with small talk, because you could always talk about everything. And a lot of times, make sure when you're talking, especially on a normal occasion, always mention the good things that happen in your marriage. That's why we always said it's so important to make sure you make those memories by having or taking vacations, because you can always go over that, look at pictures, look at videos, or what happened on your wedding, what happened on your vacation. Those are good conversation pieces. Sometimes if people live in a house with one another, don't even talk to each other. Don't even say good morning. So we have to make sure that we are having those conversations with our spouse and going over things. You could always talk about the Lord. You talk about, your have conversation about your friends, family, and work. Some people like to talk about their job, and some people like to vet. And having a conversation sometimes is just mainly listening. If you're a good listener, and you have to make sure that we are listening to our spouses. And my wife always say, I always jump to conclusions when she started a conversation. And I had to make sure that I wait till she finished. Because, sometimes when somebody start a conversation, if you think you know the answer, you're going, make sure you listen, and make sure you listen wholeheartedly to what our spouses are saying. Because they have a lot to say, a lot of things that they go through, and a lot of times they just want to vent, because they have busy work schedules, and and things of that nature, and just busy life. And when women are in the workforce, they have to prove themselves just as hard as men, especially minority women. It's hard enough, being in the workforce as a minority male, but when you're a minority woman, you have to you usually have to work just as hard as or harder than the average person. So they, sometimes they bring those things home and they just need to vent. So that's part of listening to your spouse, or having that conversation with them where you're just listening, because sometimes people just want to talk and they don't want to be interrupted. And, when we all are, and, one thing I always realized and understood, that no matter who you are, you're not going to be a perfect conversationalist, or you're not going to be a perfect listener. But those are the things that you work toward being. You work toward being a perfect listener, because again, no one is perfect. No marriage is perfect. So we have to make sure that we're listening and having those conversations with our spouse. And they don't always have to be those real serious conversations. The ones where you say, I need to talk to you. It doesn't even have to be the conversation like that. It can just be a normal conversation about anything. And, part of that conversation or having a conversation is listening and letting the other person get out whatever they want to. And then you put in your little 2 cents. So we have to make sure that we are doing that because it's easily, because if you have a conversation is going in the wrong direction or going the wrong way, it could always lead or end up in a disagreement. So you have to make sure that when we're having those conversations, think before you say something. Because sometimes when you're having a conversation that causes a whole another issue, you might say something that come off the top of your head. And sometimes we can't just speak what's on our mind. People say, speak what's on your mind. Sometimes you can't always speak what's on your mind because what's on your mind might not be appropriate or might not be needed at that particular time. She's venting, then all of a sudden you come out with something. Yeah, this and I this, I that, And a conversation is not always, you don't always use the word I. You use words like we or us or our. You don't use a lot of a good conversation. You don't always use the word I, because, when you start doing that, then it becomes a one-sided conversation. Conversation consists of two people with two thoughts that are put together to make one statement. So that's how you should do with a conversation, and make sure that we are listening to our spouses, and not jumping to those conclusions, and make sure that we have our ears open, our hearts open, so we can understand what they're going through and what's needed in our marriages. Because again, we mentioned last week on the program how the enemy is really after marriages and don't agree with marriages and things like that. So we have to make sure, very, very sure, that we are listening to our spouses and being there for them. Because when you be there for them, things work a lot smoother. And part of being there for them is being able to engage in a conversation. And again, it doesn't have to necessarily have to be a serious conversation. It's just, just small talk. How's your day? How's you going? How are you doing? And how are you feeling? And I say, oh, you always ask me how I'm feeling. Yeah, I always want to be concerned about how she's feeling, because sometimes wives, because a lot of people think that women complain a lot. They're not really complaining. They're just voicing how they feel. And sometimes when they not feeling well, listen to them. When they're not feeling well, don't add to cold to what's already on their heart. Just open your heart, listening to them, and then you could have a wonderful conversation with your spouse, and then you will find yourself enjoy talking to your spouse. Because some people you can't stand talking to your spouse. So every time I talk to them, nobody listening. And then when that goes about, usually there's things start happening where every time you start a conversation, you end up bad or end up into a disagreement, and that should not be. You should not always start a conversation, even if it's a serious conversation. It should not end where it turns into or develop into a disagreement. It should just be a regular conversation where we as men are listening to our spouses, and women as wives listening to their husbands. Because sometimes people just want to tell you what's on their heart, what's bothering them, and sometimes they don't really necessarily need you to diagnose it or analyze what they're talking about. They just need to get something off their chest, And that's how it is in the Bible. That's why I say, take all your burdens to the Lord, all your cares, and cast them on Him. Uh, that's how Jesus is with us. He listens to us, and a lot of times we think He's not listening because He's not saying it or you're not hearing from Him. But I found out a long time ago, if you're not hearing from the Lord, that means that He is working on your behalf. Actions speak louder than words. So He's working on our behalf. Sometimes we think, we're praying about our spouses, we're praying about important decisions that we have to make in our marriages. And sometimes we're thinking that the Lord is not listening, but He's listening. It's just that when we don't hear Him, He's working on our behalf. We have to remember that. And the same thing in our marriages. Sometimes when you're having a conversation with your husband, if he's not really saying that much, that means he's listening to you. He's a good listener if he's not, trying to out talk you, because once you start out talking a person, then there's no longer a conversation. It becomes a disagreement because both of you start, trying to get one up on the other one, and then it just becomes a mess. So we have to make sure that we are engaging in those conversations. Again, it don't necessarily have to be anything serious. It just be a simple conversation, because we always have something to talk about. Something in because there's so many things that's going on in life. You can talk about things that are going on in the world, your feelings about those things that are going on within your church and how your church is going. And again, we're going to mention again, make sure you be faithful to your churches, because God honor people that are faithful to their church. Because if you're faithful to your church, you find out that things and answers, you get faster answers to the things that your petitions that you're putting before the Lord. You find out that God is really answering your prayers. So we have to make sure that we are having those conversations with our spouse. Our spouses are so wonderful. If you haven't told your spouse that, make sure you constantly tell them how much you love them. Constantly compliment them. Always compliment them, and make sure that and wives, make sure that when you're out in public with your husband, make sure you look your best. You want to, because you're representing your husband when you when you go out like that. And same thing with husbands. When you go out in public, make sure you're looking your best, and you don't have to have. Doesn't mean you have to have a suit on and all that. But make sure you're looking your best when you go out in public with your spouse, because you want people to see a prosperous couple, not looking like they're going through. Some of us don't have that. I said it once before on the program. Don't have that Walmart look when you go out. I've seen some sites at Walmart, but don't have that Walmart look when you go out, looking like you're going to Macy's or something. And that way, when you go out, you can have conversations. You can sit down. When you go to dinner, you can have conversations. And sometimes it doesn't even consist of a verbal conversation. You can have a conversation just by holding each other in silence and just admiring each other. And make sure you tell your wife that you adore, how much you adore her, and let her feel like a queen that she is. And a lot of times with all the worries and life and all the things that goes on in life, a lot of times it's kind of hard to for people to be all lovey-dovey and all that. But make room for it, make time for it, and then it makes everything go so much smoother. And make sure you have those conversations with your wife, and the same thing with your children. You have to make sure you have conversations with them. And as you have conversation with each other, the kids will notice that you talk to each other. Because a lot of times when you're quiet, people tend to run over you, or if you're quiet, it means you're holding something back. And sometimes it calls for you to share your heart, and sometimes it calls for you to just have a normal conversation. This is Pastor Larry, and we're going to be signing off with having that conversation with your spouse. Right now, we want to take this opportunity to invite you out to our services at New Zion Christian Center. We're located at 15014 Plains Street in Plainfield, Illinois. Services begin Sunday morning at 11 a.m.